My name is Paul Darby. I work at the University of Ulster at Jordanstown. My presentation today was on the migration of African football players to Europe. Um, in terms of summing up the presentation, I started with a sort of traditional sports geographic approach to sports labour migration by assessing the history of migratory movements of African players to Europe. Subsequently moved on to identify some of the key patterns in terms of the movements of Africans to Europe. I think the paper demonstrated that a lot of these patterns actually mirror sort of colonial connections, broader colonial connections in terms of the country of origin that African players migrate from and the countries of destination. From that I moved on and assessed the impact of this process on African football, both at a domestic level and at an international level. And there are two interpretations of this process. One is the European perspective, which argues that this process effectively contributes to the development of the African game in terms of raising playing standards, contributing to the grassroots popularity of the game, facilitating development at the level of the individual migrant player. This is a view, though, that is heavily contested within Africa. There is a belief that this process of Africans moving to Europe is a process that actually serves to underdevelop the African game, both at a domestic level by reducing standards of play, which has a negative impact in terms of sponsorship, media interests, gate receipts, but also at an international level, because a lot of African nations have had difficulties in procuring the services of their players for international competitions, training camps, etc. One competition in particular which has been very problematic is the African Cup of Nations, and there have been lots of club versus country tensions over the last 10 years or so, certainly since the numbers of African players have increased. The numbers of Africans in Europe have increased. I then just basically finished the presentation with a conclusion that assessed the role of what I see to be the key stakeholders in terms of potentially regulating or minimising the extent of the talent exodus. And those who have a burden of responsibility include the Confederation of African Football and the African national federations, who need to attempt to create a self-sustaining development dynamic that will encourage African players to remain in their countries of origin, at least for part of their career. There's also a burden of responsibility, of course, on FIFA, and to date FIFA have not really been found wanting. They have introduced a series of regulations which effectively prohibits the transfer of Africans under the age of 18 to Europe. They have also been involved in the financial assistance of African football through the Gold Project, also through the financial assistance programme. Crucially, though, there's also a burden of responsibility on European clubs. They are the key in terms of whether or not this whole process can be regulated or minimised. I wouldn't be overly optimistic in terms of the European clubs having a long, hard look at their role in some of the exploitative practices that occur. And then finally, I just concluded by suggesting that academics have also a role to play, simply by using forums such as this as a way of getting across their arguments. And perhaps this can be, in some way inform the thinking of national governing bodies of sport.